So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to my listeners. This is the ADHD Reframe Project with me, host Emma Craven, and today I'm joined by Steve. So, Steve, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Just thank you for having me on your podcast.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So, can you talk through a little bit why you wanted to be a guest?
uh, the name of the podcast, to be honest, it's
Okay.
it the reframed aspect. It aligns with my research. Essentially, that's what my research is all about. It is essentially reframing ADHD. It's the title of the thesis is beyond the deficit. Beyond the deficit only narrative of ADHD. And it kind of looks into, well, the flip side, if you like, of all the traits. It seemed like a good fit.
So, are you diagnosed, undiagnosed, self-diagnosed?
So I was diagnosed, God, how long ago now? I think it was in about 2012 when
Okay.
it was, it was, it took a lot of sessions and a lot of hours and stuff. They went through school reports, they interviewed friends and family and all sorts. I don't think they go into as much depth with diagnosis anymore, and I can understand why with the waiting list and stuff.
Yeah.
It was still a couple of years wait, so I kind of knew I was ADHD quite a long time before then. And it was a long time. I mean, I was. Everyone with ADHD has different experiences and different lives, of course, but there's some, I guess, classic cases of being expelled from school and the rest of it, at least for ADHD boys anyway. Nowadays, they'd spot it a mile off, but it wasn't as much of a thing back then. Um, I was misdiagnosed as OCD in my early 20s, and that's actually quite um, a common thing to happen. As quite a few people seem to get misdiagnosed before they find the root cause of things a bit later on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously, the stereotypical kind of general perception of ADHD as a naughty boy running around the classroom misbehaving and won't sit still. And I think
Yeah,
when any of us don't fall into that kind of into them symptoms, then we often have gone missed or not seen.
absolutely. So, I mean, that's the thing. So, I actually kind of did fit that stereotype, um, which is again why I say they would spot it a mile off now. However, and it's funnily enough, I've literally just written something about this yesterday. Um, well, for one, we know obviously the amount of women that are being late diagnosed for that very reason, because sometimes the hyperactive side isn't there. Well, it is there, but it's internalized.
Yeah.
So it's just extremely restless. It's in it's in the head. It's overthinking, and not as represented in a physical sense. Um, and so a lot of young girls that should have been diagnosed have then grown up into women and been late diagnosed as a result. But it still happens with some boys as well. Obviously, there's some boys that don't have that hyperactive side. Um, the reason I wrote about it yesterday is I've kind of done a bit of a 360. I used to. I read a whole bunch of stuff about why, in most cases, diagnosis comes around the age of 13. Quite often, there's some more extreme cases again where it's more on the hyperactive side, or there's social or emotional elements that children are diagnosed younger. But most of the time, they say, look, diagnose when we're about 13. It's not anywhere near as visible, all of the impacts. Um, I'm just going to use my son as an example. So we know the heritability rate is high. Um,
86%. Sorry, I've
yes,
just written a paper on it. So yeah,
yes,
86%.
exactly. It is. Yeah, which is
Yeah,
which is very high and similar to height. Um,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
well, it's 84 to 86% the heritability of ADHD. I'm talking about primarily. I think it's
exactly.
similar with autism.
Oh, we need to see that it's impacting your life in all these different ways. Um, so what the diagnostic criteria is actually saying is once a child is like 13 years old and starts having a bunch of problems, and those problems are visible enough, their confidence is being affected, their learning is being affected. Only then are we going to start addressing it and looking at support. And even then, it's still going to take a couple of years at least before we can actually put any of that support in place. So I kind of been looking at my own son and thought, right, we know that heritability rate is high.
Yeah.
My little boy, he's only 9 at the moment, but I can see the ease of distraction. It's not, they might not recognize it that much at school because at the moment they're learning the basics of things and a lot of stuff is novel and new. So it is keeping his interest in various ways. But I can see so many other signs, obviously from studying this stuff, that it's quite obvious to me that it's going to end up being an ADHD diagnosis. And so I'm kind of thinking, well, why wait until he's 13 and he's had his confidence affected and lost out on a bunch of learning, and these problems arise that are impacting his life? Why not actually um, put the evidence together now? And it doesn't need to be a full diagnosis. That's why there's a charity called Accessible Learning Foundation, and they're trying to push for early years screening, along with a couple of other charities as well. And I think that should be done because I just don't see the point in waiting into why wait until there's a bunch of problems,
Yeah.
and then start fixing them if you can turn around and say, actually, we know this is coming, so let's do something about it now. And it's
Yeah.
not even just about the problems to that extent. Yes, there's problems and challenges that will come, but also we know their strengths. So if we know what the strengths are beforehand as well, then we can start, um, implementing things and putting whatever in place to allow them to carve their path, if you like, in the right directions. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, come on. This is the whole purpose of the podcast and the project, and one of the main reasons why I wanted to kind of do something that was quite different. We moved from the medical model and then the social model, and then I think awareness. Like, there's lots of information, lots of misinformation as well that you can find
Yes.
online. And that's
Yeah.
why I kind of wanted to go down a slightly different route and just focus, not just focus on strengths, but highlight the challenges, but then more so leaving things on a more positive note, so where people can come and talk about their strengths, or they can cope, how you can talk about coping strategies, and primarily, I think, like you've just said, in children. So I know for young girls, they start masking around 7 years old if they're undiagnosed with ADHD. So you can imagine, like for me, I got diagnosed at 43 in 2019, before all the kind of, the long waiting lists and stuff. And yeah, it's quite a rigorous kind of, for people that kind of say, oh yeah, ADHD is overdiagnosed. You've never been
Yes.
through the diagnostic process, because it's
No.
not. It's not easy, is it? At all. So
Yeah. I mean, some of the social media stuff doesn't help with that. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because in some ways it does spread awareness and help people who do need a diagnosis start on that pathway. But on the other hand, there's a lot of stuff that's on social media where like, oh, this is ADHD and that is it, and some of the stuff is nonsense, and some of it's just like, actually, there's no correlation between ADHD and whatever this this behavior or this trait is.
I
So yeah, so there's I mean, I'm not on that much of social media anymore. I came off quite a few of the channels, but I have seen, I follow some groups on Facebook, and they seem to be run, several different ones that are run by the same people with either bot accounts or fake accounts posting these inane questions. It's all just there to generate much rage bait, just there to generate lots more comments to grow their audiences, for, I'm sure, some kind of nefarious purposes, based on some of the stuff they they post on there. So yeah, I mean, it's you will get, I think, situations where people think they're ADHD and aren't, based on some of that stuff that goes. I think there was a bit of a study on TikTok, and they found something like half, or maybe over half, the majority, or even of the stuff that gets posted was actually misinformation around ADHD, which isn't helpful, obviously, because there's already enough issues around knowledge levels as it is, without that being added in. Yeah, but then some of the stuff that gets posted, obviously, is accurate, and there are correlations, and some of that is strange correlations that people aren't aware of. For example, audio processing disorder is quite a common one. People didn't realise the overlap with that. That's something I personally, I kept going for hearing tests. I kept thinking I needed to go for a hearing test, and people kept telling me, "You need to go for a hearing test." And I'd go for these hearing tests, and people would say, "Your hearing's fine. We don't know why you keep coming here." um, and it turns out, though, that there is a reason for that. Um, there's quite a high correlation of people with ADHD that also have APD, and they worked out a new test. They kind of figured out that it's not actually the hearing that's the problem. So when you're doing a hearing test, obviously you're focusing for quite a relatively short amount of time. So you're concentrating to listen for this beat, and there's no background noise. Because you're concentrating, there's less internal noise as well, because it's a short period of time. So you tend to be able to hear these things, and so that's why they turn around and say, "Oh no, your hearing's fine." Um, they came up with a different test where they'd have unpredictable background noise. So predictable background noise being music, unpredictable background noise being chatter in an office, for example. And then they started realizing that actually it's internal noise and external noise was getting in the way of the actual processing. So we're hearing fine, but the processing of the inputs of the sounds is where it became a problem. And then, yeah, there's a whole bunch of other weird things. Even tight muscles. I don't know if you're aware of that one. Yeah, there's tight muscles is more common if you're ADHD. Yeah,
Yeah.
kind of eating standing up, pretty weird one, but lots of those. Yeah, but it actually makes sense when you look into the why. Um, so one thing that's very common with people with ADHD is delay aversion, and sort of that feeling of being on the go. So when we're eating, we tend to be thinking about what we need to be doing next. So that's why we're standing up instead of sitting down, because it's the restlessness that comes into it.
Yeah. Oh. Well, that's that. Yeah, I've obviously read a little bit about these things, but yeah, definitely the audio processing thing is a problem for me. I couldn't remember. Is it disorder? The last
Yeah,
word.
yeah,
Yeah, sorry. That
that's the one.
thing.
Mm,
Because I can't, if like I used to work in an office, and I just used to get so distracted. This
mm,
was before and after I got diagnosed, and I found that I and even now, if someone is talking and I'm having to write something down or do something, I can't do the two things at the same time. Or
same.
if I'm asked a question, this is just an example. If I'm asked a question and the person needs me to give an answer, like in the moment, I need time to be able to process what I've been asked. But then if anyone else is talking, I can't think straight. Is that the same thing?
Yeah,
Is that what you're talking about?
and it's definitely related. Yeah, so a lot of that's to do with is organizing thoughts. Essentially, what it comes down to is that we have more thoughts. Uh, Basically, people generally have input filters, which filter out information which your brain is turning around saying, "No, we don't need that. That's irrelevant. X, Y, and Z." Um, ADHD people don't have those filters, so there's more inputs, more stuff's coming in. So managing that and organising it is obviously, it means that we often need a bit of time, but also what it results in is multiple alternative meanings. So if someone asks you a question, or say gives you some kind of direction or something. This is something you'll probably recognize. It's very common with ADHD. People notice it even from when they're children at school, and especially grown up into the workplace later, is that someone will turn around and give some direction in a meeting or whatever else. And the ADHD person will be sitting there looking around the room thinking, why does everyone seem to understand this and not have questions? And they all seem to get what's being asked, and then they will go off and maybe follow those directions. Whereas the ADHD person, because there's extra information, and because there's also missing information, so there's both extra information and some missing information at the same time, which we then have to extrapolate from. We end up having multiple alternative meanings, so we need to narrow things down. So let's say someone at work may come up to you and say, "Oh," and they'll be talking about some meeting, some conversation happened in some meeting. People with ADHD will often turn around and they'll have to sit and think, "Hang on," and they might need a few more clues or to ask a few questions because they can see various different things that that person could be talking about or could be saying, that they need to then ask questions to narrow that down to work out, because it's possible that they I don't know, they might be there's maybe three different things that what that person said has some meaning to them. So yeah, that's quite a common one. And then the distraction side of it as well. Obviously, yeah, that's that's massive for everyone.
I mean, it's a little bit weird that we're talking about. It's not weird that we're talking about it, but you just made me realise. So I can't actually do them things in the moment. I need time to go away and process what's been said, and then come back and give like my answer. But also, like in my studies, I can't listen or read. Not listen, read. I can't read a lot of academic information, firstly because I think a lot of it's boring, and there's obviously a process or a repetition to how something needs to be written, but also I've realized that I'm better if I listen to everything on audio.
Yeah,
So I've got an app on my phone, and that called Speechify, and that you've got different voices that you can set it. So one of them is Snoop Dogg. So it's hilarious getting Snoop Dogg to read aloud one of the, the
studies.
kind of
Yeah,
neurosciencey stuff that I really like, but is very technical and very scientific. But I like to learn about it because it's just something I'm fascinated in. But yeah, just kind of being able to listen. So I've got it on my laptop and on my phone, so I just listen to everything on audio. And it was a lady that put a post up about it on LinkedIn, maybe, I don't know, a year ago, maybe longer, and she was either just finished her PhD or was at the very end of it. And she'd focused on, like, people with ADHD or autism. I can't remember exactly. And she said that one of the things that came out of her research was that if specifically for ADHD, if you get up and move around but listen to things on audio, then automatically then your brain will just listen to what's been said. And I was like, surely that's not really going to work, but actually I'd like to say it does. And it's weird because you're not actually concentrating on what's been said because you're up and you're moving around, and you're distracted with other things. But I've tried and tested it loads of times now, and trust me, it works. And I don't know really how or why. You might be able to tell us a
I
little bit more about that, but it's just, yeah, it's fascinating.
I don't know the technical reasons, but I can confirm that if I'm on a phone call, for example, say something to do with work or whatever else like that, if I'm pacing on the phone, it helps my mind churn, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
I can, yeah, it's definitely, it definitely works for me. Whereas if I'm sat down on a phone call, then everything's not going as quickly, if that makes, yeah, the cogs aren't turning in the same way. So yeah, it makes sense. I don't know the technical reasons. I haven't really looked into that, but I'm sure there's some reasoning behind it. Yeah.
Yeah, probably. And also, one of the previous guests said to me that she's sat and tried to think about ideas or to kind of process information that she's been learning, and then the minute that she gets up and does something else, it's there in the brain. But the problem with that is you need to capture it while it's there, and unfortunately for me, or for most of us probably, the brain has already moved on to the next tab. So it's kind of
Yeah. I
that kind, and then that information retrieval for me is just it's gone. So
so I keep Google Notes on my phone for this very reason. A lot of ideas come either in the shower when you can't write them down, or often as you're attempting to go to sleep, and the
yeah,
brain's whirring. Then that's
yeah,
yeah. But often as well if I'm driving, and then I have to use voice to get Google to take notes, so that yeah, so that everything's kind of marked down there. Um, but some of the time as well, it's when you're just generally sort of distracted, if you like. So, as bad as this sounds, maybe if I sat there with my kids, enjoying time with my kids, but my mind is elsewhere, and I'll be thinking something. I have to note it down. Um, and if I don't note it down, then I know I'll just be stuck on a loop, rolling it around in my head continuously. So get it written down, then I can close that thought, and then enjoy that time with my kids and stop being so distracted by whatever that thing is. Yeah,
fascinating. It's fascinating. I've got a couple of apps on my phone that are dictation apps. So if that
yeah,
happens, yeah, I just open it up, and on iPhone you can just dictate into anything, can't you? So it's
yeah,
super kind of user friendly, ADHD friendly, let's say. But
yeah,
as we're talking a little bit about research and stuff today, is there, like, when it comes, because my biggest issue, which is why I'm always fascinated to understand people's other experiences with academia, is the academic writing. Similarly,
yeah,
because of what we've just said, the information goes from my brain so quickly, or it jumps onto the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and having to physically sit down and write,
yeah.
for me sometimes is painful. I'm laughing. I don't know why I laughed then, but I'm laughing because it's me. But it can be painful in the moment sometimes, because I'm,
Yeah.
and then it's trying to kind of remember what that information was and stuff. So, do you have any issues around anything
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely. I mean,
study related?
I'd say that academic writing is far from neuro inclusive. Um,
Yeah, it's not
and
inclusive, is it, for us? Well, not for
no,
me anyway.
well, and it's it's not neuro inclusive for the same reason a lot of things aren't, because it's so driven by processes that are very rigid, where it's been decided this is the way that these things must be done, and there's no flexibility that it must be followed in these exact in these with these exact rules. Um, Not recognizing that people think differently, and there's different ways. And don't get me wrong, I'm totally accepting that there must be guidelines. That the scientific method must be followed,
Of course.
and there must be methodologies, and there must be criteria being met, and whether it's stuff to do with the ethics and all of this stuff, all of that is important. And so I recognise the importance of having some rules and some processes, but with everything I find in life, whether it's work, school, academic writing, everything else, it's overly processed, it's overly engineered down to, and it's too exact, and it's too inflexible, and there's not really an acceptance that actually maybe there is other legitimate ways without losing any credibility or quality. There is still some other ways to do this too. Um, but yeah, I have the exact same issue with reading studies and the rest of it. Some are easier than others. I've noticed some now have started adding plain language version summaries and stuff to the bottom, which is helpful. Um, it's easier for me certainly. So with with my research, I have no idea how many research papers I had to read through. Probably nearly 1,000,
Oh,
I would guess, um, uh, and about 40 odd books. Certainly, it was a lot easier to read the books, even though there was a lot more content in most of them. than it was the research papers. A lot of research papers I'll read, and I'll have to try and read several times, and I'll still be sitting there thinking, "What are they even saying?" I don't.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
What I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, what? And then sorry, I interrupted again. But the problem
What?
with that is that I have to go away and find out what they mean, and then come back to it, and then that's time that I've not wasted, but time and energy that I've used. When if you just wrote
Uh,
it differently,
yeah,
maybe.
it's overly formalized, overly technical, over-engineered language a lot of the time. And so I've got one thing I've started doing, but obviously you have to be careful with it for how much it gets stuff wrong. But AI like Google Gemini, ChatGPT, you can put a study into them and say, "Can you give me a summary?" But you've got to be so careful with doing that, because there has been times where I've put stuff in and it's pumped something out of. I don't think it's saying that, and it's obviously got it completely wrong. So yeah, to be used with caution, but it can be helpful. And then some of the time as well, there'll be situations where if you find a study, you can then go off and find someone else that's talking about that study, and they've dissected it on and analysed what's being said and the outcomes and stuff. And then you can read that and you can be like, "Oh, okay, so I get it." Then once you've done that, you can go back and read the study, and it makes more sense because someone's kind of turned it into normal language for us. So then when we go back, it kind of, we can piece things together a bit easier. Yeah.
I mean, I know AI is a very um, funny subject to talk about when it comes to academia. Um, and yeah, you have to be extremely careful if you do use any AI, um, like within your studies, even just to find like the information on a research paper that you need without having to read the whole thing. Because obviously, when
Yeah.
you're doing literature reviews, you only really want to use certain bits of some research reports, don't you? You don't need to use all of it.
Mm.
You just need specific information. And, I use, I forgot, Scholarly, I think, which is something that was given to me through DSA, Disabled Students Allowance. So obviously, if you have ADHD or autism or dyslexia or any kind of barrier that can cause issues within your studies, then you are entitled to help through DSA. So yeah, there's a few things that they've given me that help, and I think Scholarly, because it gives you like it breaks everything down and it puts it into I've actually set it so it gives me ADHD friendly information,
Yeah.
like from the actual research report. You upload it and it just gives you a breakdown rather than going through it all. Because I don't know
That's
about
quite
you.
useful. I think I've missed a trick there, not having that by the sound of
Oh,
things.
okay. Okay.
I could have done with that. It's just
Yeah, you could. Didn't you have DSA for your studies then?
I did, but it's I got, what did I get? They gave me a couple of different things, a couple of different softwares that they kind of weren't much use, to be honest. I think they were almost the generic things they kind of give to everyone.
Yeah.
And yeah, I didn't. They yeah, I don't think I've ended up using any of it, which is a shame. But never mind. But if I knew, it Scholarly sounds good. I kind of wish I knew about that when I started. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was something, because it's weird. Whoever assesses you, obviously has different experiences with different software, don't they? So it's not like because the first person that assessed me um, for DSA was gave me something that I can't even remember what it's called now. But then I had to have a review a little while later because I've got fibro as well, so I needed ergonomic equipment. That was
Mm.
just a nightmare trying to get that. Anyway, this is a story for another day. That it's a long story, but my needs were reassessed, so I had a review, and then yeah, they gave me Scholarly and a few others as well. But yeah, it's just, I'm fascinated because I know with writing, when it comes to those of us with ADHD, it's adding an extra layer, because I explain it, I don't know what the technical term is, but the process of brain to my hands is kind of, so whether I'm typing or writing, handwriting, the processes of the information between the two things is just, they're not there, or they are there, but they only appear every now and again. So yeah, it's just that physical process of actually writing that is my biggest barrier. That doesn't mean to say that it makes me incapable, but it's just, that's the bit of academia that I wish, like, if I could have like a verbal conversation with someone, or just submit an audio, obviously with references and all that jazz. If I could just submit an audio, which I can't do at the moment, because I don't think that's seen as a reasonable adjustment in higher education yet. But I would love to see that, because I do think that it would be like, because I repeatedly see a lot of ADHD students just struggling with everything. And I think it's a shame, because we're actually more capable than we're almost given credit for sometimes, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that comes back down to that, exactly as I was saying, the processes stuff, right? It's so my research breaks into a few different areas. One of them is the reframe stuff, which I guess we can hopefully cover in a moment. But one area which aligns with what you were saying just there, and with the process stuff, is it's not just even about processes; it's about pathways. So the way I see it is, you can have level pathways and macro level pathways. The micro level pathways are the processes, that kind of thing. So the ways that smaller things, tasks, homework, work in general, projects, and all that stuff, the way that stuff's done, you put all those together and they make these macro level processes, which is just how life is navigated in terms of following a curriculum and doing all the things that are expected of you from society, and then going into the workplace and doing X, Y, and Z, not ending up going off the rails, if you like. So what I put that down to then is, okay, so we have these standardized. What's happened is they society, and I'm not saying this is done on purpose. It's not a big conspiracy theory. It's just the majority of people are obviously neurotypical. When I say neurotypical, there are average ranges. So when society is built by any majority, it's going to be building things with their experiences and their points of reference in mind, right? So society has grown up and evolved around us in a way that kind of funneled people to match these expectations and to match these points of reference that those people have. Nobody sat there and said, "Oh, let's design a society." It's just all loads and loads of people culminating together, building bits and pieces of society. But it's created a big funnel where the people go in at the start of the funnel, and everyone gets pulled into these standardized pathways. And to those pathways are then, okay, this is how you're supposed to live your life, and this is how it's supposed to. This is how you do this. This is how you do that. And it's because it's always been done this way, and whatever else, and people have decided that's the most efficient, or anything. And that's the same to do with the national curriculum in particular. But with people with ADHD and just neurodivergent people in general, not even just necessarily just ADHD, they don't necessarily follow those same pathways, or they meet a lot more obstacles on those pathways. They will struggle a lot more on those pathways. So people with ADHD typically then start not being able to follow those same standardized pathways and start carving their own. In carving their own, they then start going off in all sorts of directions. Now, a lot of the people that I interviewed for my research it was a bit of a biased sample, because it didn't include people that were out of work, or say in prison, or any of that kind of thing. These were people that had professional success, with ADHD. And what you found with all those people is they all course corrected, if you like. So they went the long route. They carved their own pathways. They couldn't follow these standard ones. They carved their own pathways. They went off in some, we call it negative directions, and then figured out some things later on and then pulled it into a different direction. A lot of them end up doing very well. Some of them entrepreneurs and great careers and the rest of it. But they took the long route and they had a lot of unnecessary obstacles on the way in order to do that. Whereas actually, what should happen, in my view, is instead of saying to everyone, okay, you all need these standard pathways, it more needs to be like, here's the direction, here's the goals, and we understand people need to get there in different ways. So yeah, here is a standard pathway if you want to follow it. If you don't want to follow it, we're not going to try and force everyone back onto it, and neither are we going to try and force you to carve this new pathway in ways that we think, but we're going to still provide some guidance and some sense of direction for your own pathway that you're carving, if that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect sense.
Yeah. So that part of our research essentially is about that, and it relates to the school to prison pipeline. For example, I don't know if you know that there's obviously there's so many numbers now about ADHD in terms of how many people are. So when I first started doing my research, I was reading 2.5% in a lot of places. Seeing figures 5%, 8%. There's estimates that maybe it's 10%. So I think 10% may be at the higher end. But let's say it is 10%, so it's 1 in 10 people. It's probably over 50% of people in prison. Most of the kids that are getting expelled from school, that are in pupil referral units and the rest of it. And a large part of that is because they can't follow the pathway, so they start carving their own. And if not giving a sense of direction for carving the pathways, they're just sort of left to their own devices. Then yeah, they especially when you're an adolescent. And again, I know obviously, like we talked about, women being late diagnosed, but a lot of times boys, with some of else what's going on in their lives in those years, they start carving off in some quite negative directions. And that stuff can be helped, I think, if society is willing.
Yeah. I mean, I've read a lot about ADHD because I'm obsessed with it. Hence the podcast and everything that I do. But I have kind of also looked at the different symptoms between males and females, and it seems that for men, and this is not the majority, I'm not saying that this is exactly what's going to happen, but it seems for men, the cortisol levels, the stress levels, the angry, the impulsive, emotional dysregulation things, particularly for younger boys, seems to be a reoccurring kind of theme. And I wondered if that's why that's always been picked up earlier than with either women or men.
Possibly. I like my view on it, and I've written something about this before, about a few different factors, is that some of it I think is to do with ego and identity as well. When ADHD boys are getting into trouble, they are not, if they're struggling at school, they start trying to overcompensate in other areas. So for example, being the class clown. So if you can't be the smart kid, everyone thinks you're weird or whatever, you have issues around hyperactivity and you're seen as disruptive, you then start embracing that identity. Does that make sense? So it's almost like, okay, so that's me, is it? I'm the class clown, I'm the kid that gets into trouble, the cheeky chappy. And so you start going down that route. And then what tends to happen is there's this thing with ADHD that you often end up finding, by the time you're older at least, that a lot of your friends are also ADHD, and you're looking around and not realizing that that's not actually representative. It's because if you are ADHD and you come off the standard pathways, out of the funnel, so do those other people, and you end up kind of then getting funneled together. You're the same kids that are hanging outside the school gates because you've all been kicked out, or you're the kids that are outside the headmaster's office because you've been sent there or in detention, and yeah. So a lot of these, you kind of end up getting pushed together. And so you end up with a circle of friends at ADHD, and you're looking around thinking, oh, everyone's ADHD. No, it's just, that's not representative of the population. That's representative of the funnel and not staying in it. Where was I going with that? Why was I talking about that?
I think we were, I can't remember now. We were talking about, you were talking about your research.
Boys and girls. That was it.
Yeah, sorry, boys and girls. I forgot, and it was me that said it as well.
Yeah. So that thing about then going and getting into trouble and the rest of it, right? It's finding an identity because, you know, maybe you're not the sporty one or the whatever else. So you then end up with a group of these guys, and they start trying to outdo each other on who's going to be naughtier and who's going to be, you know, the whatever else, the alpha and that kind of thing. And just young men at that age, and then also at that age when you're thinking, when you're in your early to mid-teens or whatever, and you're starting to look at attracting the opposite sex, and you're thinking, oh, okay, that's, you know, I need to be the tough guy and act all gangster and all the rest of it, or the bad lad. That all feeds into it as well, I think. So there's, don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot more involved. There's many factors in there, but some of it is barriers. It is that you've got barriers in front of you on being able to find an identity and achieve success in the standard ways. You don't know how else you're going to go and do it at that age. And some of the times with, you know, whatever influences, you're looking at things and seeing successes. I don't know, some of these guys out of that Manosphere documentary, I'm sure you've probably seen it, Louis Theroux.
I watched it, Louis Theroux, yeah. I was just like,
yeah.
What?
Yeah, no, exactly. So if you're thinking that that's success, right? Or you know some older guy in the local town, and he's seen as successful in some way that's not great, or people look up to him or whatever else, and that's all going to feed into it. So then people are going to head off in that direction. So yeah,
I think social media plays a huge part now as well, because it's like there's just a lot of social media influencers and stuff kind of give young children a very kind of different view of the world, I think. So yeah, unfortunately, I think social media does play a huge part in, I'm not talking about ADHD, I'm talking about children in general. Because I mean, I remember there was no mobile phones and no internet. I was born in 1975, so I'm old enough to know that, you know, all of this technology before then, if you wanted to send a text, you had to write a letter. Or if you wanted to say something in class, you wrote it on a bit of paper and passed it around. And I just think
I remember me and my friends used to have to walk to the local phone box to phone up our and then even there's some, but then I remember one friend, he was sort of ahead of the curve, he had a pager.
I mean,
yeah,
pagers, I was like, that was next level for me. And then they became these mobile phones, and then I was just like, wow. I think with the technology, like the technology processes where, you know, obviously we're in an AI kind of process at the moment, and AI has probably been around for a lot longer than I realised, but I think there's a lot of the technology that is great, that makes things easier for us, but I think, you know, there's also a lot of technology that causes, like, social identity theory. One of the things I talked about in my social psychology essay that I wrote a few years ago was around kind of how do we, in this current digital age, how do we identify with other people? And unfortunately, the signals that young children are given from just these influencer type kind of people, and it don't drives me mad. And then if you get onto clickbait as well, I only found out what this meant recently. I was like, what is clickbait? Just basically, and it's around I'm going off on a bit of a tangent now, Steve. Sorry.
No, go for it.
Just like I think a lot of these like these influencers or people that have got big followings, they use specific words to kind of get more of a bigger of an audience, and they use words like horrific or traumatic or just things like words that unfortunately then there's millions of people that are going to see that and put two and two together and come up with having ADHD is horrific, it being late diagnosed is traumatic. And I'm not kind of saying, I'm not the word police, but I just think we should have a moral compass, whatever you want to call it, and just basically, trying not to use words that are imprinting and are doing that. In psychology, we talk a lot about conditioning, and all that you're all doing, because your brain can, like the neurotransmitters in your brain, if you only focus on negativity all the time, your brain is going to rewire itself to kind of just notice negativity. One of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast as well, and it's fascinating. I love a strength-based approach. I love the fact that there is, like I say, my ADHD is debilitating, but I don't think it stops me from doing anything. Sometimes the inner critic can, but that's obviously from the trauma from when I was a kid. But for the most part, I'm really proud to have ADHD, and I think it's great because I'm fun, I'm animated, I just am myself, and I don't really kind of, I've just become really comfortable with that. And so I wondered if there was any trends that kind of came out of your research.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good segue, really, onto should we talk about the reframing?
Yes, please. So, we get there in the end. We just have to, I've gone off on a million tangents, so.
Don't worry, that's what we do. That's tangents can be a good thing. So, with the reframing, I mean, obviously, people have been talking about reframing for some years. They talk about it in some books, and they'll say, you can take X trait and then you can look at that in a more positive light. What my research was about is like, okay, so we know there's flip sides. So I was looking at the environmental factors. What causes something to be either on the negative or the positive? And it's clear you can take a person. I say a person with ADHD. They have whatever expertise and experience. They are doing whatever job.
Yep.
And they're working for a particular company. And let's say that they are struggling. They're having a nightmare and they're not being productive at all. You take that same person with the same experience doing exactly the same job, put them in a different company with just some different people around them, different levels of trust, different levels of autonomy, and they will fly. And they will do amazingly well. Because they're allowed to do it their way. Instead of having judgment from people around them, they're having understanding. Upon them saying you have to do it this way, they are left to do it their way, and they will do well. And likewise, vice versa, you can take someone who has many years doing very well, and maybe at a couple of different companies, and then you can give them a new job. But it turns out that this workplace has maybe a manager or a colleague or someone that's very judgmental. And then what happens is their cognitive resource ends up being taken up, constantly trying to justify themselves and worrying all the time instead of being productive.
Yeah.
And again, the processes that they're having to follow and the rest of it. So that's kind of how it works. It's all based on the environment. Those flip sides. Let's just take one distraction. Whilst you're distracted, you might be in a meeting and someone says there's some problem that gets discussed, and then the meeting moves on and people are talking about something else and you're distracted, but actually people might think, oh, so you've missed some information that's coming next about whatever that thing is, but you've come up with potential solutions for whatever the problem was being talked about. and ideas and stuff around it. So yeah, that's kind of what it comes down to. The whole thing of reframing for me is that it's either and both the negative and the positive,
Yeah.
depending on the context, depending on what's happening around you, who you're with, a lot of the time, because this is one thing that came out of my research. Often people with ADHD, and I don't know whether this is the case for all ages, but in the workplace, so often people with ADHD clash with people that are very serious. So it could be a colleague, it could be a man, anyone in the workplace. If they're very serious, very sensible, this is how things are done, we must follow this way, then ADHD, there's problem.
Sorry, I'm
Often,
laughing, but that's me because I
yeah,
just yeah. Sorry, yeah,
but no,
that's
but
pretty much
you're
me.
right. It's because we often don't get taken seriously,
Yeah.
and what happens if you don't get taken seriously is you're seen as unprofessional, and that holds you back in terms of with work, because you're seen as unserious, and unserious to them equals unprofessional, and they start looking at that as in it equals incompetence,
Yep.
when actually that's not the case. It's just that people with ADHD they do tend to be themselves a lot of the time. I mean, you talked earlier about masking, so it's not always the case that they are themselves. I did masking the opposite way to how most people seem to have done it. From from the people that I've spoke to, and the things that I've read and the rest of it, a lot of the time people start masking when they're younger. They get to a certain age where they're like, do you know what? I'm not doing this anymore. I'm confident in myself. I know who I am. I'm not masking. I'm just going to be myself. I'm over it, and people are just going to have to accept me how I am. I did the opposite. I didn't used to mask, which may be why I had a lot of the challenges I did when I was younger. Um, I was always myself, and I thought at least that I was liked and got on with people generally, and the rest of it. Then I had some bad experiences where it turned out that some people just really disliked me, and I couldn't work out why. Um, and I had a lot of struggles around that, and that put me into it sort of, because it was over a period of time as well, really eroded confidence. And then finding out that stuff has been said about you behind your back, and it being related to ADHD and the rest of it as well, it really knocked me. Um, and then I started masking, and for a while, for a few months even, I just I was so cautious and so careful. I didn't want to say any volunteering ideas. I stopped being a bit of a chatterbox and coming up with stuff and the rest of it. And I just almost shut myself down. And even though I came out of that for the most part, because I'm now more concerned with the judgment of others, whereas before I was just used to sort of shrug my shoulders at it. Uh, yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if there's other people that have done it backwards like that. I'm hoping that it still means I'll come out and stop masking again at a point later. But a lot of that, yeah, came down to the being seen as unserious. And the trouble if you're not seen as serious enough by the serious people, is then you're not seen as authoritative. And if you're not seen as authoritative, then that it causes issues at work in terms of, especially if you're managing people, say, um, yeah. So yeah, whole host of problems coming off the back of that.
Yeah, and I think as well when it comes to corporate or professional kind of jobs or roles, I do think that a lot of the time, if you've got ADHD, or even in academia as well, like I've noticed, there's an expectation, which I know is a neurotypical expectation, that we're all going to kind of fit a specific mold. So we're all just going to sit quietly and be sensible and just kind of get on with our work, like human beings do. But you're missing the passion, you're missing the enthusiasm, you're missing just because I don't know about you, but my brain is like it can just join dots that other people,
Yeah,
neurotypical people don't even see the dots. like the way that
Which
we can, and because we're
it's that
very,
passion and enthusiasm that is seen as unserious a lot of the time.
yeah,
And but the frustrating thing is that's often where the innovation comes from.
yeah,
When you've got companies that are so rigid in processes, and it's usually because they've grown really big, and there's control fears almost from the top where everything needs to be controlled. So we have to have all these really rigid processes, and I just think when people turn around and say, "This is the process. This is how you must do everything," and if you try and bring something new to that, and people don't like that and say, "No, no, you've got to follow the process," and you say, "Why?" and they say, "Because this is the way it's always been done." That, for me, is where innovation goes to die.
yeah,
That company stops being innovative at that point. It's just a big churning machine that just continues on its processes. And uh, other smaller, more agile businesses that are thinking on their feet, and allowing for innovation, and not everything to be ruled by existing processes, are the ones that are going to be more innovative and overtake them.
I just think it's a shame though, because we have a lot to offer. We just need just adjustments, slight adjustments, like having someone that's not serious, maybe in a team or in an organization, might actually inject a bit of life into it. As in, it's not all going to be like a stuffy boardroom kind of sensible environment. Whereas if you have someone with ADHD, you're just injecting a little bit of humor, or just a little bit, I call it a little
Yeah.
bit of life into a work environment.
Well, no, exactly that, and that's like I was saying about the doing the masking backwards thing, because that's how it was for me in some other workplaces. I worked with a bunch of people who were not judgmental at all. I was a manager of several people, and I didn't manage them because I didn't need to manage them. I saw my role as a manager of being there, of someone that's got the most experience in what it was that we were doing. So I was there to support, to guide, answer questions, help out if they have any issues, to go to bat for them, when it came to anything, around the company and the team, to provide training, that kind of thing. But they managed themselves because that's how I wanted to be. I don't like to be managed. I manage myself. If I'm left to it, if I'm given an objective, I will figure out the way to get to that objective, and I'll do it my way. And so I manage, if you like, in inverted commas, them the same way.
Yeah,
That worked really well. And the company I was at gave me space, to do things my way. And yeah, I was quite unserious there. We used to laugh. Everyone used to laugh together. Nothing, there was no judgment. And if I made some silly mistakes or something, people would look at it and be like, "Oh, you know, oh, okay, he's turned up to the wrong office at the wrong time," or something like that. Nobody's dying as a result. Nothing bad's going to happen. And that was kind of how it was looked at. And people would shrug it off or have a laugh about it and a little chuckle and that kind of thing. So the unseriousness didn't matter there. I was taken for my expertise and what I could do, the outcomes, what I could deliver. Whereas elsewhere, every little thing, if you're not following the process exactly, that became an issue. The outcomes didn't matter. It was not being able to follow the processes exactly. And sometimes here's a common one of frustrations that, people have with people with ADHD. Some of it comes down to the working memory stuff. So, if you're ADHD, quite often you're going to be turning around re-asking the same question. Oh, where do we keep that file again? Where does this go? How did you do that? And people get angry and they say, "Well, why don't you write it down?" Well, do you know what? I do write it down. I write all these millions of things down, then I can't find where I've written them down, so I can't
yeah,
tell you to write
exactly.
it down. In fact, I'm not sure. I can't remember if I definitely wrote this one down because there's so many things to write down all the time.
Yeah,
Um, so, yeah, there's those frustrations, and then you get the passive aggressiveness. If you ask something because you've missed something in a meeting, so you ask something in an email, and emails start coming back, "As I've told you before." Lots of that kind of stuff, and it all kind of builds up. And if you're in that environment, it means that you're working around people that are not, either there needs to be ADHD training so they can better understand the people they're working with, and not see them just. Here's the problem. if you're ADHD and you're working in a place like that, people then see these, let's say, deficits, as they would be called, and then they think that's your all. They think that's your whole. That is what makes you. They judge you and your competence levels by those things that you struggle with, not, and they don't see the rest of it.
Yeah.
And the vicious circle that then comes from that is that then, especially if they are maybe managers or the rest of it of yours, is that then because they assume you're, incompetent, you are then not given the opportunities to show your strengths to counterbalance that. So then it just becomes this vicious cycle that goes round and round, and then obviously, it erodes things further still. Whereas if it's in a place where you're not being judged in that way, where people have some perspective on issues, whether issues are big or small, and whether they can actually, we can accept these quirks or see the funny side of them even, because we can see the strengths as well, and actually let that person do what they do, because they come up with so many great ideas and they solve so many problems and the rest of it. And they see things that other people aren't seeing. And like you were saying, the connecting of the dots. There's a great book actually, by a guy called Heiner Lachenmeyer. And I hope if he hears this, he'll forgive me. I'm going to say the title of the book is really boring. It's just called ADHD and Success at Work. It's not representative of the book. I wish you gave it a different title. Sorry, Heiner. I'm sure it would have sold more copies if you gave it a different title to that, because actually it's so much more than just what the title would allude to. And it explains really well about the filters that we were talking about earlier with what letting information in and the rest of it. He explains about the why he calls it a breadth of association. All that extra information coming in, yes, it means that we need to have a bit more time to organize that, and sometimes it can be difficult to do so and manage all those thoughts. But actually, there's more dots to connect often. So in the same way as like I was saying with those alternative meanings, that sometimes we might be sat there thinking, hang on, this person's given this direction, everyone seems to know what they're saying, but I have questions. Do you mean like this? What about ruling that out and the rest of it? That same thing is because there's all these extra dots. So some of the information that's coming in because it's not filtered out, some of that might be junk information that we might not ever need. But some of it will be those nuggets that other people don't get, and other people, and it'll be that extra dot that you can go, hang on a minute, and you can, do you know, like the tangents? You're talking about the tangents. That's how it all works. Is all those dots, extra dots coming in and going off, and just going with it, going with the dots and joining them as we go. Yeah. Which other people might see as, leaping between things, but it makes sense to us, right?
I mean, most of the staff from my university have always said to me, like, we learn more when you just tangent, because they can understand then. Like, I teach them about ADHD more in the tangents, and like the joining of the dots and stuff, and it's just And I
well,
think,
I got well, sort of told off, if you like, for going off on a tangent in when I was presenting something. And what I wish I'd said to the person is that, okay, so you're seeing that verbalized tangent. That's how my mind works all the time. That's So you say you're complaining that I went off talking about stuff that you did not see the relevance to. And I was going off on this, train of thought, but that's what it's like inside someone with ADHD's head.
yeah.
So so that's maybe what should be taken in a bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, and so was there any specific strengths that came out in the research? Was there anything?
Yeah.
Are you
Do you
going
know
to
what?
publish? First of all, can I ask, are you going to publish it?
Yeah. So
Oh,
the PhD itself will get published.
Can you let
I'm
me
told
know
it will
when
go
you
into.
do? Because I'd love to read it.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Thank you.
I suspect. So I'm 3 months away from doing the Viva. it's very unlikely that they'll turn around and say, yes, you've passed. It's much more likely they'll turn around and say, you need to make some changes. So it might be another 6 months after that it finally gets published. Then it will go on to um, apparently the British Library, but I'm also going to put it on my website. Um, and then I am in tandem trying to work on a condensed miniaturized version to get published in a journal on PLOS One. How long that might take, I don't know. Because there's again the processes and the rules and the rest of it. So I've got to try and get it into the right place to do that. In terms of the strengths, I'm going to tell you my favourite one because there's an origin story for it. So there's this the research went on common observations about people with ADHD. So there's lots of different psychiatrists and psychologists all around the world, and then some studies and the rest of it that started looking into some of these things. And it was these common observations that were, and sometimes obviously self-reported as well, but the common observations for the most part by psychiatrists and psychologists that had independently come to notice certain things about ADHD clients of all ages and backgrounds and the rest of it. And then that started to form things that people would then look into more deeply. Now, one of those things you may well have heard of, and I'm sure you've probably experienced, is crisis, confidence in a crisis. Now, there's a bit, I don't know whether the correct terminology here is to say a bit of an oxymoron or a contradiction. So there's a bit of a contradiction because some people say, okay, yeah, but also ADHD people will often freak out and panic when there's stress. So actually, there's differences. So when there's a crisis, it's when let's say there's some kind of a problem that needs to be solved. Okay, and when people with ADHD are getting and panicking and the rest of it, it's a different kind of problem. That's a people problem. So that's usually when there's some kind of judgment, some kind of social thing, and it can't be solved because we don't have control over it. We can't come up with solutions to how other people are. So that's when, and again, those cognitive problem-solving resources we've spent, instead of being productive, we've spent worrying, feeling anxious because of that judgment. So bringing it back to now the contradictions explained, bringing it back to the calm and confident in a crisis. What that actually it turns out it comes down to is that people with ADHD kind of grown up all through their lives just having to figure it out, having to iterate. Because often we don't get what people are trying to say to us. We don't get the processes. People laying these things out. Oh, this is, you must do this. We can't do that. So when we're younger, we may mask and we just we don't know what's happening, but we just figure out our own way. We extrapolate because we're missing some information. We're getting extra information. We extrapolate, find our own way, don't follow the processes, make our own, carve our own path, all the stuff we've talked about. Now, what happens when a crisis occurs is the processes have broken down. So everyone else that's used to following these processes and having this prescribed way of doing things is suddenly hit with, what do? We don't know what, something's happened that we haven't got. We can't follow the script anymore for knowing what to do. So people start panicking. They don't know what to do. Everything's broken down. They're running around like headless chickens. The ADHD people just shrug because we won't know why anyone's panicking. So we just figure it out. Like we've always had to. This is how we live our lives. We figure it out. There's a problem, find a solution. Problem, figure out the solution. And so it's no different to someone with ADHD. In fact, it can work a lot in our favor because then in those situations, people actually remove some of the processes and the barriers and let us do what we are good at doing. So there was, I obviously can't go into too much detail because there's confidentiality around people that were involved in my research. But for example, there's a person that worked in a hospital, and when COVID kicked in, they acknowledged that obviously COVID was a bad thing, that bad things were happening to people. But in terms of what they were able to achieve in their productivity, because when COVID came in, they didn't have to. Suddenly, it was like, do you know what? We're going to lift the restrictions, and people don't have to be so strict on following all these exact processes. If you've got ideas, go with it. If you can think of stuff, go with it. They thrived. And they put things in place that are still followed today,
That's amazing.
which never would have been put in place if those restrictions hadn't have been lifted. But because people turned around and people started panicking and saying, "Oh my God, we don't know what to do," the ADHD people were able to step up and say, "We can figure out what to do," and they were allowed to do their thing. And their thing worked. And then it has been carried forward. But then, obviously, again, COVID goes, and then the restrictions come back in place. The strict, rigid processes get put back in place. You have to do things this way again, and it's just such a waste. I had similar people in the police force saying similar things, not to do with COVID, but about other, crisis situations. And it's businesses do it, loads of places do it, and it's part of the reason why you end up with so many people that are entrepreneurs, because again, I know we were talking earlier about people with ADHD being overrepresented in prisons, but again, that pathway carving doesn't always head in that direction. It heads in productive directions as well. So you end up with a lot of people that are entrepreneurs that are ADHD, but it's not just because of that pathway carving and not wanting to be managed and the rest of it. But it's also because then they can they can come up with their own ideas, pursue those ideas which they can be passionate about without people adding restrictions and their processes, all the rest of it for them to have to follow. Yeah.
I mean, that's that I know that is a reoccurring theme with adult people with ADHD as adults. I do know that is a reoccurring theme, and I've met a lot of entrepreneurs that have got ADHD that don't necessarily kind of fit the mold of like the professional or corporate world, and I don't fit a mold really. So I've just decided that I'm not going to have a mold. I'm just going to be myself and see where I end up. But I think that unfortunately what happens then is I know there's a lot of people that talk about superpowers and people with ADHD being gifted, and there's also lots of judgmental people that say that that's toxic positivity, which I don't necessarily agree with, because I think that there are things that we can do, like you've just explained, that other non-ADHD people can't do. And does that mean we've got superpowers? I don't know.
Personally, I don't like the terminology for it.
Okay.
Because I guess that comes back to exactly what I was saying earlier, is that because it's context dependent, it depends so much on the environment, and also there are people that I know that are really struggling in many different ways, and a lot of that again is because they aren't in that environment. So there'll be entrepreneurs that have done very well, and they might refer to it as superpowers, but then I don't think they are aware that if they hadn't had some of those opportunities or pursued some, if they ended up back in the happiest people with ADHD are the people that work for themselves, for this or work for very understanding, open, trusting places. But if some of those people that are entrepreneurs and have said, "Look, it's a superpower. It's given me it's given me." Okay, yeah, it's a superpower for them. But if they take themselves and put themselves in another person's situation, then it wouldn't count as a superpower. It would count as something that holds them back. So I'm personally not keen on the superpower terminology. It's all dependent for me.
Yeah. And also I think it is sad that unfortunately when we're not, even if we get jobs and we sit in a leadership type role, or if we work in a team of people and we're not able to it's not the right environment for us because we're not able to, I don't know, I say use the ADHD to my advantage, because it gives me some advantages rather than it being like toxic positivity or a superpower. It gives me abilities to be able to do things in a certain way that maybe even other people with ADHD can't do. Maybe it's just neurotypical. So, but I do think it's a shame because, like I said, we've got so much to offer, but we've rarely, not rarely, but unfortunately, we have to go through a lot of we have to be in a lot of bad environments to be able to then find the right environment for us. And I know this all comes down to raising awareness, or kind of training people on what ADHD actually is, or what being neurodivergent is, and how they can make how we can implement reasonable adjustments and stuff. But that's amazing that there are a lot of bigger companies that are becoming more and more inclusive. But I just think that if there's any of our listeners that are listening to this and they're in a leadership role, or if they're in like an executive kind of decision making, employ more people with ADHD, because you're going to be able to do things that without, like, give them a seat at the table. I love that.
Yeah.
Whether that's an analogy or a metaphor, but give us a seat at the table, because we have more to offer than anyone gives us credit for.
Do you know what's really harsh is, so some of the ADHD traits are natural leadership skills. So in terms of like we were talking about the passion behind things, wanting to, the enthusiasm and the rest of it, the crisis confidence, the figuring it out, all that creativity, and just coming up with things and then going with it. But then you have these situations, unfortunately, because of everything has become so much more process driven, that you have these people that would have natural leadership skills, but leadership also requires confidence. And so you have these, you have these same people with that skill set that are constantly having their confidence eroded as they go, because they're not following these standardized processes. So then they don't get the opportunities to lead a lot of the time. And then by the time they reach whatever position in the workplace, their confidence isn't there for being able to lead anymore, because of what's been happening to them throughout the process. It's just such a shame. I mean, even down to the delay aversion stuff. A lot of the time there's a common thing, if you want to get stuff done, put someone with ADHD in charge. Give the person with ADHD the authority to turn around and say, right, let's crack on, let's do, because they're not going to faff about. They're not necessarily going to, start cutting corners with things that they shouldn't, but they're going to crash through things and just say, we don't need this, we don't need that, let's just get this done. And things will actually be achieved. I put a joke recently on, do you know, the ADHD task force has met up, and there's the government are taking a long time to implement anything. And there was something about on LinkedIn the other day, and I just put on there, they just need to put some ADHD people in charge of rolling out the ADHD stuff, and then it will get done. because there's an impatience, that restlessness, that drive to need to do this, need to get this done so we can move on to the next thing. Even though, sort of, I guess, unfortunately, we never actually get the sense of achievement out of doing anything. We always, because we need to move on to the next thing. But it gets stuff done. Yeah, but then again, you work at this at some company that there's a process in place, slows everything down. After a while, you're just, that passion and enthusiasm you came into it with just starts to be like, I've been trying to get this through for a year, and all these stakeholders keep chucking all their it's unnecessary bits and pieces and obstacles in the way, and then eventually enthusiasm goes.
And go quiet.
Yeah.
I think even with the task force, like with things like that, I'm just going to say it as I saw it, but there was no people like that were not professional, or not professors, or not this, or not like big corporate kind of people.
Yeah, there definitely was. I know a few people that are on it.
Okay, maybe I'm just told a big fat lie then, but I mean, I looked into kind of trying to join it, and I was just like, I can't even, like, no, it's just long-winded.
I think there were great people there to represent. The problem is it then gets handed over to the government. So the task force itself, I think we're bang on. It's just that then that the findings and outcomes and recommendations of that task force then gets handed off and taken away from those people. So they can come out with this stuff, but they haven't got the power to do anything about it. It gets handed to the people who have got the power to do stuff about it, and nothing happens. Same as everything else. with pretty much all government. And again, because it's all processes, right? Yeah. Bureaucracy. The ADHD's worst enemy, I think, is too much bureaucracy. Yeah.
Yeah, and that politics stuff just, my brain switches off. I'm just like, no, you're boring now. I can't. The only thing I like about politics is when they do the Prime Minister's questions, when they basically just once a week they go to the House of Commons and basically just put each other down. I think that's hilarious because I'm like,
yeah, it's
yeah. But no, sorry, no, politics is not really my thing. But I would have liked to have seen more people with lived experience, like, underrepresented, underprivileged people on something like the task force, because I think that's really important to have like a full range of not just corporate people or professionals, but also people that like have grown up in the school of hard knocks.
There definitely were a few on the task force. Yeah, so I think probably what's happened is because some of those people then have gone on to be whether activists or CEOs of neurodivergent charities or academic researchers in the space. It's like that's their titles, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But they still came from that place, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
And
yeah. Right, well, I'll stop having the hump with that now then, because that kind of that injustice and that kind of that thing for me is always, and I think maybe that's just a little bit of my applying for different things over the years, and obviously not getting the foot in the door, and then after being diagnosed with a fibro, I had to stop working, and I've just been trying to find something that suited not just to my ADHD but suited to my physical health, which I think is going to be a bit of a nightmare. But I do know that I have value. I do, because we talk about strengths, and my top 5, the first one is honesty. So I'm literally I'm just like, if you ask me something, I'm just going to be honest, and sometimes then go away and cringe and think, I don't know why I said that. And I have had the feedback that maybe just try and be a little bit gentler, and I'm like, I don't.
Yeah.
How?
It's a common one. Yeah.
Blunt and straight to the point. Honesty, kindness, creativity, love for learning, and compassion, I think, were my top 5, because I did a VIA strength-based questionnaire.
The via character. Yeah.
So they were my top 5, and I was like, I'm curious was under the top 5, but I'm very, I would call that as nosy, but I like to know things, like, and I like to know how they work, and I like to kind of I just when it comes to kind of just being honest, like I can't do small talk. Like, if I'm like, small talk just makes me feel really awkward. So what I've learned to do is just say, I'm really sorry, but I don't really do small talk. I'll try, but I ask you how you are, and you're telling me you're fine, and I can clearly see you're not fine, but you obviously don't want to say that. So it's like, there's kind of, there's good and bad within the strengths. But the honesty, and then I'm just a bit too blunt.
So small talk is seen by us, whether subconsciously or otherwise, as inauthentic and a waste of time and without purpose. And again, the delay version, the restless mind sees it as a waste of time. It's seen as we just want to get to the meat of things. You tend to find with ADHD people, if you start talking about some deep topic, whether it's, like you said, politics or some kind of philosophical, like, stuff that's really meaty, then those people will get involved. But if you put an ADHD person, a lot of us aren't very good at networking. get us talking about, I don't know, whatever small talk stuff. We're rubbish at that. For the most part. Again, I should always try not to generalize, but there's again, the high correlations with people with ADHD tend to dislike small talk for those reasons.
Yeah, it's just it's almost painful because I'm like, oh hello, how are you? And then that, oh yeah, I'm fine, thanks. And then that's it, and I'm like, well, then I don't really know what else to say, but I can see that the person's not fine because I can read people. I'm very intuitive, so you can clearly see that they're not fine, but they're obviously not wanting to say they're not fine. So I sit there sometimes and think, well, what do I say now? Because
Yeah.
And I know that there's obviously, specific social cues in the environment that we're meant to kind of adhere to, but I don't. It's just, I'm always polite and I'm always respectful, but I am very honest. So I just think that, sometimes I can be a little bit too honest or a little bit too blunt. But I generally will kind of focus on, because when I used to work, I've always done support worker work, which was great for my ADHD because it was different every day. I'm supporting people in housing. I worked at probation. I worked, in quite a few different places. Worked with teenagers with mental health and learning disabilities. Lots of different kind of variety, but it was different every day. So that really suited my ADHD. Even before I got diagnosed, it was just like that was like, I've always been a helper. I've always helped other people, but I've always specifically liked primarily to help people that are underprivileged, underrepresented, the minority groups of people that don't actually get any access to any kind of support. I've always been a really strong advocate for the most vulnerable, communities and stuff. So trying to find somewhere where I can do that without my brain has just decided to just stop working and I can't remember the words.
Don't worry, that happens.
But
trying to find somewhere you can do that where it fits.
Where it fits, like the corporate world, or even academia, or professional kind of things. So it's a bit of a challenge, I think, for me to kind of find, because helping others has always been what is my purpose. It's what used to make my, like, I just get it, like, the passion, enthusiasm, like literally, like my heart starts racing and I'm like, right, okay, and it might just be something really small that someone needs, and I'm like, yeah, I can do that, it's all right. Like, I've done a lot of advocacy stuff within my university. I've advocated for ADHD students like massively for the last 2 years, and just kept pushing and pushing and pushing until, like, even within like companies I worked in the past, and I do like a bit of a debate on LinkedIn. I am a little bit of a debater on LinkedIn, but I try and I know I don't I'm always respectful, but I do.
I try to I used to get into loads of debates all the time, and I still do sometimes, but I try to avoid it now because I end up losing sleep over it. Whereas the other person probably has just gone on with the rest of their day, and I'm wanting to try and convince them. It's not online debate. I'm not sure how healthy it is. But I do know what you mean. It's hard when you see someone saying something and you're just like, hang on, that's not right. I need to, without trying to sound too condescending, I need to educate that person because I do know about this stuff, and I need to tell them that they're wrong and why they're wrong, and help try and convince them and win them round. It's hard not to do, but it's particularly on Facebook. I've learned to try and step back from that now. And what always happens anyway is you show people a bunch of evidence, you prove them wrong. It's too much for their ego, so they block you. Because people don't like to turn around and go, oh, do you know what? Actually, on reflection, I didn't know what on earth I was talking about.
Yeah, so obviously there's different levels of being honest, and on Facebook I've just had to unfollow certain groups and stuff or people, and I just need to, just don't look, because I'm just like, oh my god, like you're doing it again. Like ADHD is horrific, and I'm just like, it's clickbait and it's attention seeking, and I'm like, yeah, so I have to kind of almost, I've had to kind of condition myself to not kind of have a debate, let's say a passionate debate with people that I don't even know, and try and say, well, no, actually it's not my place to do that. But I like talking about the strengths, because I think there's so much negative conditioning that we get. I think, hence why I wanted to do the podcast and stuff, is just to talk about, just reframing ADHD as a more of a positive, strength based approach, rather than just, so I need to step back and not argue, but debate with social media people, because it's just pointless.
It is. I think things are going in the right direction. There's more awareness. There's so much research going on at the moment as well. And I mean, I've been doing it about 2.5 years for this study. The amount of research that's come out even just since I started doing that, and loads more of it. And there's just tons of books coming out by very, very knowledgeable people on it as well, that are saying exactly this stuff. That is, the world gradually is starting to realise exactly what you're saying, that there's a bunch of strengths in it as well, and it's almost like the shells being cracked open kind of thing. So yeah, and as long as it carries on in that trajectory, it doesn't help obviously some of the media stuff that's come out over the past few days. Notice a lot of the time, a lot of these articles that come out slamming ADHD come from journalists that haven't bothered to speak to any experts in it. There's something that came out within the last couple of days. It's a GP. Obviously, yes, it's really important to have general practitioners, because lots of people can come to them with variations of things, and they need to have good general knowledge. But being a general practitioner means they are not a specialist. That's why they need to refer to specialists. So a GP writing an article all about ADHD, I'm sure there are some GPs that know lots about ADHD. This particular GP, you could tell from the terminology they were using, clearly didn't, and was slamming stuff to do with ADHD. And I found that a bit frustrating, because like, okay, even it's not difficult for them to contact someone who is a specialist, who is an expert, and discuss some of this stuff before putting it out there in the public space from a position of authority. As a GP, I'm saying this, and I'm going to cause a whole bunch of people a load of problems off the back of it, and not seeming to care about the impact.
Yeah. So from your research, just a little thing that I wanted to ask. Did you notice any difference in the responses between men and women, or was it just, because I'm always intrigued about whether, because obviously...
Yeah, so for me, it's clear, I think, that like we spoke about earlier, the hyperactivity is much more prevalent in boys, although you do get plenty of boys that aren't, that are primarily inattentive as well. But I mean, that was the main difference, really. And it's a bell curve, right? There's plenty of overlaps. So when I'm saying any of this stuff, I'm speaking generally.
Yeah.
So it's not there. There's plenty of situations where there's women with ADHD that are more like the stereotypical ADHD boys, and vice versa. But what it tended to be the case was exactly as we were talking about earlier, is that it was the inattention that then went unnoticed, and then they kind of went through life like well, a lot of ADHD adults, but boys have been getting caught earlier, since 2008, I think they started recognising that adults have ADHD. We don't just grow out of it; we just learn to cope and mask and the rest of it. But even then, it was still the men that were getting picked up because they were still able to look back at their school history and say, "Oh, all this stuff happens, but now it makes sense. It all adds up." Whereas for women, it still took longer. And what appears, and I'm always hesitant to talk about this because being a guy and knowing nothing about this stuff, but it's my understanding from quite a few of the women I've spoke to that the menopause, when that kicked in, it was like bang. It was such a multiplier of everything to do with ADHD that it really brought everything to the stuff. All the ADHD stuff for them was already visible, but when that happened, it pushed it just so far across the line that it could no longer be, ignored, if you know what I mean. And also, so many mums that are being diagnosed now because they're taking their kids, and these psychiatrists that are turning around and saying, you know about the heritability rate stuff, right? And sort of hinting, because they've obviously not just speaking to the child, they're speaking to the mums as well, and picking up certain signals saying it might be worth you pursuing at least looking into this yourself. So that's quite a common one. But yeah, with some of the differences, a large part of it, I guess, is do you know, like I was saying earlier about the over compensating based on insecurities for the boys, where they would go off and I'm one of these people, by the way. I got into loads of trouble and I nearly ended up in prison and the rest of it. I was in that school to prison pipeline, and I'm lucky that I'm just sort of fortunate that people were around me and events and the rest of it. It didn't work out that way. But I was doing that. I was trying to overcompensate, and I was being an ADHD boy that was then that I was getting into lots of trouble. There was lots of things I couldn't do, things I was struggling with. Go down that path, start going off another path, took on the identity that was kind of built up a naughty boy and the rest of it, because that seemed to fit. With the girls, instead of going down that route, they just do what I was saying about earlier with what happened in the workplace at some point, where their confidence just keeps getting chipped away at continuously. And then you end up even more so with the people-pleasing side of stuff and all the rest of it. Yeah. So that seems to be a really common story until, and this isn't the case with all the women I interviewed, but some of them said they got to a certain point, like going back to what I was saying earlier with the stop and masking, they got to a certain point where they kind of stuck their fingers up and it's just like, no, I'm not doing this anymore. Found their confidence, and started kind of cracking on with it. But I think that's easier said than done,
It is, and it is a journey, and it's not a simple journey either. Like, unmasking as a woman in lots of different environments is very scary and can kind of leave you, I suppose, for any of us adults, ADHD adults, unmasking that as an adult when you've done a lot of, even if you started off not masking and then you've had to mask because of the environments, but kind of having to unmask, it's exhausting to mask, but it's not always easy not to mask.
That's the difference, right? Is that the girls have been forced to mask more because of the societal expectations, and like I was saying, where the boys have got that option, go off and be naughty, go off and take that other path. The girls kind of, I mean, I'm sure some do, and some definitely will do. And I'm only going, by the way, off of interviews that I've had with people. So I'm always really nervous to talk about ADHD from a woman's perspective, not being a woman. So I can only talk about what observations that I've made from what I've been told. So some of the boys have that option. It's, even though it's not socially acceptable to go off and be naughty and get into trouble, and it's still a lot more socially. Or there's areas of society where it is acceptable, almost expected, and it's okay. That's what boys do. Where it's in no place acceptable really for for girls to do that. So they don't have that option. And again, I'm sure some still do. And in fact, definitely some still do. There was a couple of young ladies that I interviewed that went off in that direction. But for the most part, most women don't. So then the suppression is greater because they don't have that other pathway to go down. So instead, it's just, you can't do this. You can't go down this other pathway. We're keeping you on the standard pathway that you can't follow. And then your confidence is just going to be just completely eroded over time, where you're not allowed to go down these other pathways because of the way society views women. Yeah, it's pretty dark.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about ADHD and women all day long, but just kind of linking back to what you said about, you know, young teenagers, early teenagers, for women, you know, it's not just about hormone fluctuations when we get to perimenopause or menopause, but every time the estrogen drops, because I've researched this quite a lot. I've not written an academic report about it, but I've written some kind of stuff about it. But every time, in women, estrogen is directly responsible for the dopamine release in our brains. So every time the estrogen levels drop, obviously we've already got a dopamine starved brain, because that's what, you know, ADHD is. We struggle with dopamine release and norepinephrine, which is always a bit of a difficult one to say, but
Mouthful, yeah.
yeah. So for women, and I think because of the expectations, like you've just mentioned, even at school or in work, you know, we're kind of forced into just be quiet, sit down and be quiet, and just get on with whatever you're doing. Or, you know, if you kind of are, and I don't like the word normal or abnormal, but if you kind of go down a slightly different path, or if you're a little bit quirky, or you're just not kind of, you won't fall in with everyone else because you just, no. I do think it's a shame, yeah, but obviously for us women, by the time we get to the perimenopause, that's when, so for teenagers, when they go through puberty, male and female, boys and girls, obviously then that's when the symptoms can start kind of increasing or decreasing. But then for women, you know, a week before your monthly cycle, your estrogen drops, so your symptoms are going to increase. You know, there's obviously an added bonus of emotional dysregulation when this happens as well. And then postpartum, so just after you've had a baby, the estrogen significantly drops, and that's why a lot of women become quite depressed, but also like suicide ideation. Being a parent for me was very kind of scary, but you know, it didn't. My daughter's 27 now; she's actually a midwife, and you know, so she's like my biggest pride and joy from the chaos of my past. But you know, and then by the time we get to the perimenopause, the estrogen drops significantly. Suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts are very, very prominent for women through the perimenopausal stage, because you know there's no kind of, so obviously when you're your monthly cycle, you know, your hormones kind of the estrogen drops, but then it increases, you know, during or after your period. So you know, the perimenopause is when primarily there's a lot of women that are being diagnosed because you've masked, you've high functioning. I don't like that, because I think, well, either you're high functioning or you're low functioning. Well, you just function, don't you? You just have to get on with it. But there is a lot of women that I know that have getting to the perimenopause stage of their life, and all of a sudden they just can't manage anymore. They can't, you know, their coping strategies or whatever they've been doing in the past, just, you know, the brain fog, the exhaustion, like, and just, it's, yeah. So it is something that I've also been fascinated in, and I do watch out regularly for research that's being published and stuff. But yeah, just yeah. And so what I'd really like to say to the female listeners today is that if you are struggling with anything that we've talked about, then please just reach out. We're probably both happy to support, or just I just think it's, you know, these conversations are really important to have. Hence why the ADHD project, Reframe project, is here. So yeah, is there anything any oh my goodness, like, okay, my brain is just, it's had a fart. I call them a brain fart, sorry. So yeah, that's why I was asking, I think, whether you'd noticed any kind of differences between men and women when you were doing your research, because, you know, it's fascinating to me to because I do know that I've struggled to find research around women's hormonal fluctuations and ADHD symptoms. I know quite a few people that are doing a dissertation on it, and my dissertation is going to be happening soon, later on this year. So, oh no, next year probably. I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, that's why I asked. So, is there any kind of strength-based thing that you'd like to leave the listeners with today, Steve? Pearls of wisdom.
I guess a lot of it comes down to that environment thing again. The context thing is that if you're in an environment where things are challenging, and I know this is easier said than done. You can't just change jobs, like that's something that's easy, but that for me, like there's all the stuff around reasonable accommodations in the workplace, right? But I don't think it's just, and I think that they can be beneficial, but I think the problem is that we focus too much on those reasonable accommodations and not just attitudes and environment.
Yeah.
And I from all the people that I've spoke to, and personal experience as well, it's clear to me that the environment is a much bigger thing. The people that are around you are a much bigger thing than anything to do with reasonable adjustments and accommodations. From what I can tell, for example, the place I work now, I haven't asked for any reasonable accommodations. I don't need them because people just let me do what I'm there to do. They've hired me for my expertise and my experience and the rest of it, and they trust me to do that.
Yeah.
And so no one's standing there saying, no, you've got to do it this way. So I think, understanding that, if there is situations where reasonable adjustments are to be pursued because of the environment or because of something to do with, judgment or social issues in the workplace, then it's important to know a reasonable adjustment or accommodation or whatever you want to call it that is reasonable is asking for there to be training, for people to have ADHD training specific to ADHD as well, because I think there's this problem. There's a lot of HR departments and managers and stuff, and they have this like 20-minute training video on neurodivergence, and it just goes through each condition and just gives a top level. That's not doing anything. If anything, that's harmful because of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Those people then coming away thinking, oh, I know what I need to know now. I've done the training. I've got my certificate. I know all about these things. And then they don't think they need to learn more. So they learn the surface of it and not the depth of it. And they stop there because they think they've got enough learning. Whereas actually it needs to be in-depth, much more specific about how these things manifest per condition, if you like, rather than an overview. So yeah, I guess if there's a takeaway, if people are struggling, it's fine, I think, it is fine to say, actually, I want there to be ADHD training. And there's, you can apply for funding to have that done as well. So, yeah.
I think as well, on a personal level, although this can be quite difficult for people, because if you've grown up in environments, or if you've been in environments that have tried to basically quiet you, and you've not felt safe enough to be able to be yourself, I think one of the most powerful tools that any ADHD person can do is just, kind of find out what your strengths are, but then try and advocate for yourself. So look at the different environments that you're in, whether it's at school or university or at work or wherever you are. Like, if you can try and advocate for yourself and say, these are the things that I struggle with or I find challenging. For instance, we've talked a lot about them today. Like, these are the things that will allow, I need extra time to do, or these are the things that I struggle with, time blindness, like lots of things, executive functioning and things like that. But also empower people to say, right, these are the ADHD symptoms that I struggle with, but these are also my strengths, and trying to kind of get like people who are diagnosed or not diagnosed, whatever, to understand that, like to empower them with through self advocacy, and allow them to kind of, or to show them how you can show up for yourself and how you can actually find better workarounds than just a 20-minute training on what ADHD is, when you're not actually going in depth. And I think sometimes, although it is a scary thing to try and do, actually empowering people with ADHD to do that for themselves, or even just to kind of, look at themselves in a different way, rather than looking at just on the things that you find challenging. Actually, you may find specific things challenging, but actually there's more positives and there's more abilities that you've got that kind of outshine the challenges. So that for me is kind of one of the things that I wanted to do through this podcast as well, is just to kind of empower anyone with ADHD to just get inquisitive about themselves, learn about your ADHD symptoms, and then try and find workarounds, try and find what your own reasonable adjustments should be, and then kind of give yourself the space, or when you feel safe enough in an environment to talk to someone and say, actually, like, that doesn't work for me because it's too rigid, or it's too, we don't follow a linear path, do we kind of go around like that. So I mean, advocacy for me is I love it. So if anyone is listening and they need help, then please do reach out, because I do love a bit of I love to support people through advocacy that need help. But anyway, blimey, we're getting close to 2 hours. I can't believe we've been talking for nearly 2 hours, Steve. Crazy. Anyway, any pearls of wisdom that you'd like to leave anyone with? I know you've said.
Is
there anything specific that's helped you throughout the years?
Actually, so I don't know if you've got many parents of ADHD kids that listen to this, but there's something that I kind of not that I should be using my child as a guinea pig for experimenting. I worked out some stuff that, and this is not my parents' fault at all, because they were not to know and they were doing their best, and they were great parents. But I worked out what didn't work with me, and then I combined that with my studies, considered what would have worked with me, and again sort of aligned that with research and the rest of it, and then have sort of been testing things out on my son in terms of what works and what doesn't.
I love that.
It's very clear to me that, do you know, like we were saying about the filter and the missing information and stuff like that, some things need to be more explicitly said to kids with ADHD. So for a lot of neurotypical people growing up, there's some things they just put two and two together, and they grow up and they experience the thing. Things are said, they read between the lines or whatever else, and they understand what's being put across to the messaging. And I think with a lot of ADHD kids, that doesn't happen. Even though we can connect lots of dots, there's some dots we can't connect. And so with ADHD kids, being really explicit and explaining the connections between things with to do with behaviours. And so my little boy doesn't really do tantrums anymore. He went through a phase of tantrums just like I did, and you know, and all kids have tantrums, but ADHD kids obviously a bit more prone to that. Most of the time anyway. But we've managed to kind of make that stop, because now he's got, and he just discussing with him and talking to him about how he's 9, but he understands the concepts of escalation and de-escalation. Because we've literally sat there and we've talked and used examples, and like saying like, so, okay, so this thing happens, then your emotions are taking control, almost to like an adult, but in a simplified way. Your emotions are taking control, and you can control your emotions, or your emotions control you. If your emotions control you, then things escalate, and then this happens, that happens, and we look at the outcomes. We sit there and we discuss what are the outcomes in this scenario when that happens, and in that scenario, and then what happens if we de-escalate. And we've gone through it, and it took a bunch of times of doing this. Now, if something happens and it seems like he's about to kick off, he stops, he thinks, and he turns around, he calms down. And he's just like, and it works. But it's just really explicit, a whole bunch of conversations going into depth and detail where he's working the problem and he's starting to realize, and he's going, I get it now. I see how it works. And it's taught him anger management, and it's taught him to be able to control his emotions in ways that I did not have when I was younger.
Me neither.
Yeah, exactly. Which is again why we got in so much trouble with the impulsivity and stuff, right? So I don't want him making some of those same mistakes as I did, because again, I was lucky, and I don't want him to be reliant on luck. So I need to make sure he understands this stuff, and is more powerful than his impulses. And can see them, spot them, and detect them, and know what's happening, and the rest of it. But you know, some people might say, you know, a 9-year-old kid's not going to understand that stuff. But you go through it enough times in enough different ways, it sinks in. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, wow. That, and I do think even with young children, because they don't really understand what's going on, or they don't understand why they do certain things, like you've just explained with your son. He might be, you know, at a young age, but still he's clearly very intuitive, and you've taught him emotional intelligence, like to a
Yeah,
T.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't want it to seem like I'm like this
No.
this parenting guru. I'm far from it, and you know, and every kid's different as well. It might not work on all kids. It's just a thing that I've tested out. Yeah, yeah.
And I think with my daughter, she's 27 now, but you know, she came with me when I was have being assessed to be diagnosed, and you know, she was able to tell the psychiatrist things that I didn't even kind of realize, which was a good thing. Because but even like with her, we get on much better now she's moved out, because having two very strong-willed women in the house was a bit of a nightmare sometimes, with the hormones raging and stuff. And even, you know, with my daughter, I've since I've kind of in the last few years sat down and explained to her like why I do things in a certain way. So why I can't give you a yes or no answer, and I have to tell you the whole backstory and go off on 20 different tangents and then not even answer the question that I've been asked. Like, why can't you do that? Why do you need to? But since I've started just opening the conversations and explaining, she kind of gets me a lot more, and there's none of that kind of friction between us. And even, I mean, most of my friends are neurodivergent, but even, you know, with neurotypical people that I've met through university, when I've been in, you know, different kind of advocacy stuff that I've done, like when I actually sit and explain things, they kind of they're never going to be able to kind of get it unless you've got ADHD. You can't fully understand. But when you just open that dialogue, like that honest and like animated dialogue, that's when people kind of, we're moving past awareness and into understanding, aren't we? And I think that's a really kind of like doing that with younger children, I think is really important, because we get too much negative conditioning from a very, very early age. And I think that is really important, to give children, empower young children, even as young as your son, just to understand what's going on and why maybe he is.
That's it. The why.
Different.
There's a need to understand why, and that's key to so much. And I'm sure that's the case for all people as well. But it does seem, and again, there's one of the themes in my research is actually about that. The difference between being able to the interest levels, and being interested and not interested, and a large part of that comes down to a need to understand why. And again, the processes, whether some processes and the justice sensitivity stuff, a lot of that loops around, okay, but why? It needs to make sense. If it makes sense, then great, we can go with it. If it doesn't make sense, we're going to question it, and we're going to struggle with it. Yeah. And yeah, exactly. Same with kids.
Yeah. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So yeah, I know it's the weekend. Oh, happy Easter to the listeners. You might be listening to this after Easter, but yeah, happy Easter. And Steve, thank you so much. Please do let me know when you've published, because I would be interested to read what you've written about. But yeah, what an absolute pleasure to spend 2 hours, over 2 hours, talking about reframing ADHD and everything else. So yeah, I mean, listeners, look out for when Steve publishes. I can do a little bit of a shout out once you publish, because I'm sure there's listeners that would be interested in reading what you've written about. But yeah, good luck.
Hopefully before the end of the year. And I do. I mean, I write articles about bits and pieces of my research. I haven't gone for the whole, because I'm saving the big one for,
of course,
for when I actually publish. Yeah, but I write bits and pieces about my studies on my site anyway.
Amazing.
So
I will post you. Have you got a website? I'm sure you've got a website. I can post the website in the description of the podcast. So
sure, yes, ADHDworking.co.uk.
Oh, well, let me just write this down. And all I ask from you as a guest is just to share.
Of course, yeah.
So hold on, I can't. I'm just doing the typical ADHD thing.
Don't worry, yeah.
Working.co.uk. Perfect.
Yeah. ADHDworking.co.uk. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of them things where you're like, oh, it's a very ADHD thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, Steve, thank you so much for your time today.
Okay.
And happy to have you back once you've published, or once you're able to maybe talk a bit more about the big findings in your study. Then please, by all means, come back and we can.
So I've got 6 themes, each with 3 sub themes. Well, after I publish, I'll happily come back and talk you through all of them.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I mean, please do.
Okay.
And please do let me know what you when you pass or not pass. I don't know about PhD. I'm just trying to do the undergrad.
That is a pass. Yeah, basically that's what it's. Yeah.
So then, will you be a doctor?
Yeah. Although obviously not a medical doctor.
No, I know. Still,
yeah.
Dr. Steve.
But technically Dr. Steve, yeah. So yeah, no one saw that one coming, including me. Yeah.
Listen, I didn't even know I was capable. I was told I was thick. Like, this is going down another tangent. At school, at work, at home, like, my mum is just a narcissistic bully, and I was always told that I was thick. And then, like you've explained, environments like, being in learning environments, even like, courses and training I did within my work, and not being able to grasp it, and all of that negative kind of thick narrative followed me until I got diagnosed. And then a couple of years ago, I decided I was going to try and do a degree, and I get really good grades, and it is still a huge surprise. Like, every single time, I always think, as soon as I've submitted, the thinking is like, okay, as long as I get over 40%, that's a pass. And there's, even from the very beginning, the first module I submitted, I get, I don't really say it out loud a lot because I get really embarrassed. But I think it's a really important point for any person in academia that's got ADHD to be proud of their achievements. I really do believe that we should do that. And I get, my last one was 78%, and that was qualitative research. And I'm hitting a first so far in level 5, so I'm aiming towards a 2-1. And then if I get a first, then anyway, that's another tangent, and that's just taken up a few more minutes, so I apologise.
Don't worry.
But it's one of them things that I do like, because that's a huge reframe, isn't it? Like I was always told, and I believed that I was thick, but actually I'm not. I'm just different, and I've needed I've needed the right environments to be able to learn, and I've had some amazing support, or I have still amazing support, and that's just enabled me to be able to shine, really. So
do you know when people complain about the label and they say, oh, why do people need to be put in boxes? Why do they need labels? That's why all of the people, every single person that I interviewed for my research, all of them found the label helpful because it explains something. A lot of them grew up thinking they were weird, thinking they were broken, thinking, why it's just me, only me, why am I the only one like this? Then comes a diagnosis, or at least learning about ADHD, and realizing it's not just me. There's loads of people like me. I'm not broken, and so and that label gives them that. It gives them an explanatory framework. It allows them to access support, medication if they go down the medication route. So people that complain about labels, I don't get it. As far as I'm concerned, the label can be a good thing. If we don't have that label, then we're the naughty kid, we're the disruptive. So the labels are there anyway. We're forgetful, we're clumsy, we're disorganized. All these labels are all there. It's just that we're lumping those labels in together with now some good labels mixed in with that too into one thing. So we can't get away from the labels. We're just trying to have that one label to summarize everything, and that label can be helpful.
And just get inquisitive as well. Like, try and work out how your symptoms, I use the word manifest. So what are your symptoms? How do they kind of, and then understand, what the things that you find challenging, and then, coping strategies. And for me, the biggest empowering thing was just the strength-based approach, and just concentrating on, the top 5 or 6 strengths, rather than thinking, or sitting there repeatedly telling myself, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't. You can do anything that you set your mind to, but if you've got ADHD, you need novelty, and you need to have a little bit of excitement in what you need to be interested. Because if you don't have them 2 things, then it's just, like admin writing stuff is boring for me, probably is for most people with ADHD. But once you find that kind of thing that ignites that passion and that enthusiasm in you, then run with that. And even if you're a parent and you've got young children, find out what do they like doing, what are they interested in, and then it's just trying to find workarounds in, building really strong, independent, empowered children. And we're breaking that trauma cycle of like us being late diagnosed adults. So that's it's a really powerful point, I think, to leave it on. But honestly, Steve, thanks. So just let me know when when you can talk about your research, and we can book another thing in.
It'll definitely be before the end of the year. Well, I say definitely. Obviously, there's no guarantees, but I'm as certain as I can be. It'll be before the end of the year.
Well, so, I've got no idea about a PhD. I participated in a few research studies, but I've not. Obviously, I'm still doing the little undergrad, so I'm just working away at that. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time. I know I was a bit chaotic as usual, but thank you for
No,
your
don't worry.
patience as well.
That's what we do.
But yeah, I hope you have
Embrace
the
the
rest.
chaos.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
ADHD chaos. It's
Yeah.
like, I love the fact that people just get it. So I always do apologize, because I think that's the polite thing to do. But yeah, when someone gets it, it takes away the shame. So then I don't feel ashamed, because I'm very chaotic, or I'm this or I'm that, and it just removes the shame. And anyway, we're going to go down another tangent. So yeah, take care, enjoy the rest of your Easter weekend, Steve. Right. And to our listeners, please reach out if you have resonated with anything that we've talked about. And yeah, thank you very much for listening / watching.